Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Southwick Community Preservation Committee meeting. Tonight is January 17th. It's a little after 7 o'clock. We're doing our meeting tonight in hybrid. With us tonight, I'll have our commissioners introduce us who are here at the meeting. We'll start with Brian on this side.
Brian Walker.
Jeannie Reed,
Chris Pratt.
Beth Thomas,
Dave Span.
Okay. And missing tonight are Joanna Horacek, Dennis Clark, John Wally, and Cassandra Bach. Maybe they'll show up. Okay. Also with us tonight, we have Stuart Sagener. He is the Executive Director of the Community Preservation Coalition. And welcome, Stuart.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for lending your expertise and time tonight for people who tune in. Hopefully there'll be more people tuning in. We're in the winter doldrums right now. We have no projects and the little things are a little slow, so. Okay. We don't really have anybody for public comment right now, so we'll forego that. Even might be better if people do tune in and hear Stuart, we can give some time for some discussion later. Okay. So we'll go right to Stuart. If you'd like to start, Stuart, you're going to give us some information on just the overview of CPA funding and uses.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see if I have, Sabrina, I think you need to give me permission to share my screen.
Oh, man.
She can do it. She's done it before, I know.
Advanced all participants. Sure, let's give
Yeah.
it the works.
Why not?
Did that work?
Yeah, I think I did it. I did it.
All right. Excellent. Slideshow from the start. Okay, so do you see that title slide?
Yes.
Pretty Tree.
Excellent. Thank you. I think Wilbraham, I think that's from Wilbraham on a peach farm they bought with CPA funds.
Nice.
way back, like early on in CPA. That photo's been around for quite a while. Yeah, it's one of my favorites. That's why we use it for our title slide. Although, you know, there are plenty of pictures from Southwick which could make our title slide for some of the CPA stuff you've done there, actually. So thanks for having me. Sabrina thought it would be good to have just kind of a refresher course on the basics of some of the finer points of CPA. And we always take that opportunity to update folks on what's happening statewide with the trust fund and other communities and legislation. So kind of a 60,000 foot view of what's going on with CPA, and then a refresher on some of the finer points that we find communities might have missed along the way as they were getting trained on CPA. First, I'll tell you about our organization. I'm the executive director of the Community Preservation Coalition, and we're a nonprofit based in Boston, but we're really just a combobulation of a bunch of other nonprofits that work in open space, historic preservation, and affordable housing. Someone from each of these organizations sits on our steering committee. We have 8 folks from CPA communities, mostly people who sit on a CPC on our steering committee, and we have 7 at-large members. So there's 21 folks who kind of set the policy of the coalition and meet quarterly. And the things we do are very typical of all the other, municipal trade organizations that support different committees in town. If you're on the CONSCOM, for example, you've got MACC that does education and advocacy for you. If you're on the select board, you have MMA. If you're the moderator, you have the Mass Moderators Association. There's a bunch of these organizations, and we're the one for community preservation committees and the 196 cities and towns that have CPA. And the things we do, are on the screen. They're typical of these type of organizations. I'd say we're best known for our technical assistance. We probably handle about 4,000 email or phone calls on CPA from across the state every year. I'm going to show you our website in a second. I hope you're taking advantage of that, but there's a space on that site, particularly for you as a CPC member. Hopefully you're all getting our newsletter. We spent a lot of time up on Beacon Hill doing advocacy and legislative work. I was in the building all day yesterday, actually, with Senate Ways and Means. We help communities adopt CPA when they're interested in education on doing that. And then we run workshops and training sessions like this one. We support ourselves the way most nonprofits do. We apply to foundations for grants. Those organizations you saw on the first slide help us along the way as well. But the vast majority of our budget comes from membership dues that communities like Southwick pay to the coalition to be a member. And it is totally voluntary. We're really grateful that 99.9% of all the CPA communities that have an administrative budget do join. It's the only way we could exist. And we do feel that, we really hope that you feel like you're getting your money's worth from our representation of your interests statewide. We're a pretty lean and mean organization, so that money is not going to waste. There are exactly 2 of us full-time. Chase Mack is our communications director. He's on the right side of that photo. That's actually his lovely wife. And they're campaigning down in Milton when they were voting on CPA on election day a few years ago. And we are just about to post a position, a 3rd position. We lost someone during the pandemic and want to backfill that position for someone to do advocacy and research for us as well. One other thing I'll tell you is, look, you'll see throughout the presentation tonight, these little, what we call bookmarks down in the left-hand corner. You see a number 1 in that little, it's not a triangle, it's not a square. I don't know what you would call that little icon there, but we will send a copy of this presentation tomorrow to everyone on the CPC. And each of those bookmarks will have a link that sends you to a place on our website where you can find more information on that particular slide. So stay tuned for that email from Chase or I tomorrow. As I mentioned, this is our website, communitypreservation.org. And hopefully you've all been there, but I really want to call attention to what I've circled here at the arrow in red, the technical assistance section of our website. When you open up, when you hover over this menu, you come up with this, what we call a super menu. And these are all the technical assistance categories that we have primarily for the audience of community preservation committees. So this is kind of your place on our website. Behind each of these titles here are literally hundreds of articles on every facet of CPA. And, you can easily find the things that you're interested in. And if you can't, give us a call or shoot us an email and we'd be happy to help. But hopefully you'll find this website a good resource, particularly if you're new to the CPC as well. And Chris, pardon me, but of the people in the room and your members that are online, any fairly new members to the CPC?
I wouldn't say totally new. No, I mean, most of us have been here for a few years at least.
Okay, good.
Most over 3. So
All right.
did go over the I sent out the link that you did was it 2 years ago for the boot camp.
Right.
So
Yep.
I think they're familiar with that. And I think most of them have seen the boot camp. So that was a very helpful slideshow. Yeah.
All right. So if you look at CPA statewide, it's in over half the municipalities in Massachusetts. I don't think anyone ever predicted that a tax increase act would be in 196 different cities and towns. If you think about it, every single one of these communities had to vote themselves a voluntary tax increase. Many of them had never had an override of any type in their entire history since Prop 2.5 came into being in 1980. So it's a pretty incredible accomplishment. And it's really taken off a little bit more even in the past decade, where the cities and particularly the gateway cities have really joined CPA. You had Westfield that joined very early, and Agawam as well. But most of the other cities in Massachusetts kind of hung back for the first decade or more to see what this new program was all about. But in the last 10 years, Springfield, Pittsfield, Holyoke, Chelsea, Fall River, New Bedford, all these very large Lowell gateway cities have joined CPA. So it's pretty exciting to get funding to the communities in Massachusetts that definitely need it. And Worcester just adopted CPA last year, and we're training their community preservation committee in a couple weeks. We're really proud of that last statistics. There's not any community in the state that has adopted CPA and then decided they wanted to change their mind and revoke it. And it is possible to revoke. It's only actually even reached the ballot 3 times, and it was handily defeated. In all 3 cases, the citizens said pretty overwhelmingly, we like this surcharge. It's worth it for us, and we want to continue with it. So I don't know if we'll be able to say that forever. And hopefully when that 0 turns to a 1, it's not Southwick.
Well, we've tried to repeal it before here, and it was almost unanimous that we kept it. So it was.
Yep. That's terrific. And that's been the case in a lot of communities. I mean, when times get tough, it's natural to look at, what you can do to reduce the tax burden on residents. Or if another priority comes up, if a town needs to build a new high school, one of the great things about CPA is its flexibility in terms of your participation. So we think of it as a positive, actually, not a negative. Here's the map that matches the slide I just gave you. The communities in green are the towns that have CPA, and the orange are the cities that have CPA. And like I said, that orange piece has been really growing fast in the past decade or so as more cities came on board. I think that this coming year could be another big year for CPA adoption. We have a tremendous amount of communities that are inquiring about CPA. Not too many cities this time around, because most of them are already in the program. There aren't many that aren't. But Haverhill is one of the cities that's looking at CPA. The presidential ballot tends to be a big one for CPA adoption. You'd think after 23 years that everyone who wanted the program would have already adopted it, but we're still seeing tremendous interest in CPA. So we'll keep you abreast on how that impacts you and the trust fund and what happens next year as we move along. So these are the brand new numbers that we just crunched for CPA based on all the projects that were approved through June 30th of 2023. And we're now up over 16,000 projects. And the figure that I think is just astounding is the amount of money that's been raised for CPA. It is over $3.4 billion that has been raised. And CPA is a pretty new program. Like I said, it's only been around since 2001. So it's an impressive amount of money. Anyone want to guess how much money every year is added to the CPA total from the local surcharge and the state match combined? Anyone want to give a wild guess? Off the cuff.
To Southwick?
No,
No.
for the whole state, all 196 combined.
150 million, maybe?
What's that? Someone said 150?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's double that. It was 296 million last year. $296 million every single year for open space, historic preservation, housing, and recreation. So it's become quite the program, which we should all be proud of that, because if Southwick, which was one of the early adopters, hadn't done such a great job with CPA, all those other communities wouldn't have adopted it. If the experience of early adopters like yours was a negative one. So it's a great testimony to all of our hard work, I think. These are the stats for the different categories. Historic preservation is the most popular category by number of projects, but the projects tend to be smaller. So it's not number one by dollar volume. Affordable housing is actually number one by a hair in the dollar count, but the money rolls up pretty evenly, honestly, throughout all these 4 categories. And that's, again, one of the great things about CPA is, you guys get to decide what to do with the money. Even that state money that comes to you every year is deposited in your account, and the instant it hits your account, it's considered local funds, and you don't have to ask the state for any kind of permission on what to do with that money. As long as it's for one of the 4 restricted areas of CPA, you can choose how to spend it for the most part. So continue on with a little more talk about the money piece, because that seems to be what everyone's always interested in. There are really 3 funding sources for CPA in Southwick and every other community. You folks have that 3% property tax surcharge. That is the maximum that you can have. And it really benefits smaller and less affluent communities to have 3%, because there are actually 3 rounds of funding in the annual trust fund distribution, which is the second big source of funding for CPA. You get a check every November 15th from the CPA trust fund. But there are 3 rounds of funding there, and communities that adopt at anything less than 3% only get round 1. Now, the biggest part of the money goes out on round 1, but if you adopt at 3%, you get money from round 2 and 3. And I'll indicate how much of an impact that had for you and why it was so great in a minute. The third source is you do get interest on your funds, your unspent money, as it sits in the town's coffers or in your reserve accounts, waiting for a project to come along. That is earning interest along with the regular town money that they've invested. But they need to keep track of how much interest is attributable to the CPA fund and pay that out into the CPA fund when they close the books at the end of the year. I have found some communities that the accounting staff didn't know this. So it's always good to check. Do you folks know for sure that you are getting the interest paid
Yeah.
into your fund?
Yeah,
Great.
we got over 43,000.
Yeah. So I was going to mention that it never used to be a lot of money. But there you go. With rising interest rates, it's adding up, so Chris, that's about half your salary as CPC chairman right there. And
There you go.
here, right? So it's great that came from the interest.
Right.
By the way, I didn't mention that if you folks have questions along the way, let's make it interactive. I'm happy to do that. I feel bad that I couldn't be there with you. I really had intended to come out, but the legislature, as they are, schedules hearings on bills at the last minute. And they dropped one on us last week for very early tomorrow morning, a hearing on housing issues. And so we have to be there for that. So unfortunately, I had to move to Zoom, but I don't want this to be any less interactive. So feel free to jump right in. And Sabrina or Chris, if I miss someone, please let me know and
Sure.
stop me. All right, so let's dig into the trust fund a little bit. So the trust fund itself actually has 2 different sources of revenue. The first, and the one that's in the CPA legislation and statutorily dedicated to you, is collections at the state's registry of deeds. So anytime someone records a document at any registry across the state, there are 26 of them, there's a fee that the registry charges for every document. And it's different for every document. I think deeds are $210, a mortgage is $125. There's different amounts for different types of documents, whether it be an orders of condition from the new deck that you are putting on your house that you get from the Conscom, to a trust document when you create a will and you create a trust in the will and you file that at the registry. Each of those things has a fee. Most of that fee goes to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, but $50 of every document goes to the CPA trust fund. There's one document that's less. $25 is the fee for municipal lien certificates. So they take $50 right off the top. It is a true trust fund. It is transferred at the end of the month to the Department of Revenue. They've put it in an account. That account earns interest too, by the way. And the only thing statutorily that can happen with that money is it's paid out as a match to communities like Southwick that have CPA every November 15th. It's not subject to appropriation by the legislature or the governor or anyone else. It's automatic, and it's terrific to have that funding source. Every other program in the entire state would love to have an off-budget funding source like that brings in anywhere from $50 to $80 million a year to be distributed to CPA communities. Unfortunately, that fee is a fixed amount. And when CPA was first passed, it was actually $20 a document and $10 for municipal lien certificates. And it stayed that way without any kind of cost of living adjustment until 2019. We started seeing that, the trust fund match was falling back in 2007. So we started talking to the legislature about raising that fee. And it took us till 2019 to have success on that. So when you're asking for money at the legislature, it's a very long process. But we finally did get it raised from $20 to $50. in 2019. Along the way, the legislature, they're big fans of CPA and they wanted to help if they could. They said, look, it's not politically the right time to raise that fee, but we will start helping you out by giving you extra funding from the state's budget surplus. In most years, the state does have a budget surplus. They decide at the beginning of the year what they're going to do with that surplus if there is one. And so over the past 11 years, we've gotten about $118 million added to the trust fund from state budget surplus funding. It is not automatic. It is not guaranteed. It is not part of the legislation. It's something we have to trudge up to Beacon Hill every year, starting in the spring, and ask for it. And then it's a 6-month, advocacy process. And you've probably seen emails from us along the way when we do this, asking for your help to contact your local legislators. We're successful a lot more than we're not successful, but this year we were not successful, unfortunately. There just was not enough money to create a surplus for the state. And I don't think there will be one next year either.
No,
That's already determined.
Did someone have a question? I'm sorry, I missed that.
No, we're saying it, you're right. It doesn't look like there will be this year either.
No, it's not good. Times aren't good for the state budget right now. And unfortunately, it's kind of a perfect storm because the green funding source that you just saw on the left side, the fees that are collected, they're down too, and they're down by a lot. The trust fund collections are down 30% compared to year over year. That's $18 million less over the past year that's been collected at the registries for CPA. So it has impacted and it will continue to impact the match. Your match last year was still pretty good though. You got a 47.6% match. That's outstanding. If you think about it, that was your return on a 1-year investment. So, if you had a 401k and you got 47.6% return on that, I think we'd all be doing handstands, right? So
yeah,
you're in pretty good shape. And it's because of that 3% surcharge. So if Southworth had adopted anything less than 3%, 2.9%, you would have only gotten a round 1 match. And last year, the round 1 match percentage was 21%. So you can see you more than doubled your money on the trust fund match by having that 3% surcharge. I presented in Shelburne yesterday to train their new community preservation committee, and they will get a 100% match because they adopted at CPA, and they're really tiny. The formula for the second and third round is weighted to favor small communities and less affluent communities. And so compared to the entire state, because, the East dominates the state, you folks are on the small side. And believe it or not, even on the less affluent side, compared to the Waylands, the Westons, the Wellesleys of Eastern Massachusetts, where the salaries are much higher. So it's always going to benefit a smaller or less affluent community, usually meaning a Western Mass community, to have 3%. And so that was a terrific foresight on getting CPA adopted at that level for you. And it's going to pay dividends this year and every year. Even more important to have those dividends as the trust fund falls, right? So any questions on the trust fund or the money at all? No?
No.
All right. All right. So let's talk a little bit about you folks and what you do, and a reminder of some of your tasks and duties. These are some ongoing requirements that the legislation does ask you to do. Hopefully you're having at least one public hearing per year in which you're asking the public to come and tell you what their priorities are for CPA. A lot of times this is confused with presenting your projects to town meeting. Sometimes communities feel like they want to have a public hearing to talk about what their recommendations are before town meeting, and that's fine. But that's not what this public hearing is supposed to be. This one is really supposed to be to get the public's input on what priorities you haven't addressed yet and that you need to look at in the future. So typically, the public hearing is done at the beginning of the process rather than at the end of the process, but the CPA legislation doesn't mandate that. So, if you folks when did you do your public hearing? Is it before town meeting or is it at the
We
beginning of
usually
your,
do it in June
in June? Okay, so after town meeting,
after, correct.
so that's the beginning of the next year process. So that's perfect. And then once you do that public hearing, you do have to update your community preservation plan. I do hope you have a community preservation plan, but I will say again that some of the communities that were very early adopters on CPA sort of missed this requirement because CPA was so new and our organization wasn't around to do technical assistance back then. So is that something that you have created over the years, a CPA
That might
plan?
be something we would need a little bit more help with. I think, we have a vision, but we don't really have a formal plan put together, I believe.
Okay. Great. So that is something that, is statutorily required. So that would be something to focus on, particularly if this is a downtime for you, if you don't have a lot of projects right now to consider, that would be something to jump into and to look at. And hopefully that's something that Sabrina could kind of quarterback. And then, a lot of communities have their CPA administrator kind of coordinate it, but then, dole out individual sections of the plan to different committee members who have an expertise in that area.
Yeah, she has been after us about that, so she's on the ball.
You're
Okay, excellent.
supporting me right now.
Oh, good. All right. And
Thank you
Sabrina
for
and I we did not talk and correspond and conspire before this
We did
meeting.
not.
So I promise you.
Sure.
So luckily we do have a page on our website all about CPA plans, and we've actually, combed through a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them to find some really good ones, and a good variety of ones, simple ones, from smaller communities and really extensive big ones from cities. And we put those samples on our website. And we try to put them up in a Word doc format. So you can, if you see great ideas in there, feel free to cut and paste. There's 190 of these things out there. And so, the good ideas get recirculated. And that's the whole idea of sharing and being a community, which is in our title. So feel free to look through those and use those as a nice template for what you're doing.
We call that pure poaching.
Yes, absolutely. It's perfectly legal. And these are all public documents and you're all volunteers with the exception of Sabrina. So, you don't have, you're not expected to put in 40 hours a week here. So let's make it easy and use what you can of the work that's been done prior to you. Once you have a draft, we are happy to proof that for you and point out any suggestions or errors and let us know. The other thing that's important for you folks to do is to review your account balances periodically. And you're not responsible, obviously, for, cashing the checks as the tax revenue comes in or even keeping the books on CPA. But the town is doing that and they should be giving you regular reports. Do they do that? Some towns it's hard. And
Yeah,
to
we
get that
have to ask for them and sometimes they're slow in coming, but
Yep. So, that may be something to address with the select board or the town manager. They should be providing you with that information on the exact same schedule they provided to department heads. So if the DPW director gets a report once a month, the CPC should get a report once a month. So, that's something that, that DOR, asks the finance departments to do. I will say that our finance and accounting departments at municipalities are incredibly short-staffed and under the gun. And the regulations and the requirements of things they have to do keeps increasing every single day. And the staff and budget of the department does not. But still, it shouldn't be too difficult to hit a button and generate these numbers for you. And they should do that on a regular basis. One place that's good to get a snapshot of your overall CPA program is a form called the CP2. Does that ring a bell to anyone?
Yes.
yeah.
Okay. That's a form that the town has to do and file with DOR once every year by October 15th. And it's basically your profit and loss statement for the program. It shows everything you spent the year before, the account balances in each of the CPA accounts at the end of the year, how much was spent on administrative. It certifies, that you've done your 10% requirements. How much interest was credited to the fund is on that. It's a great form. It's a 2-page form. And I do find that a lot of times municipal officials, when they file it with DOR, because they file it electronically, it's not a piece of paper that you can copy. You know, they file it and they forget to, you know, download a copy and send it to the CPC. So that's something you can ask for right now, for a copy of your CP2 from FY23. And it'll give you a good snapshot of things. And then, of course, the two main things you do, you know, your reason for being is the last two bullet points here: to prepare and approve a yearly budget and make recommendations on projects. One of the great things about CPA is, we talked about this a little bit, the state does not put many requirements on you as to what you do with your money. There's actually only one requirement, and that is every single year you have to spend or reserve for later spending 10% of your annual revenue in each of the 3 reserve accounts. So you have to either do a project that is worth 10% of your annual revenue in the housing category. And if you don't have one that year, then you need to put 10% in a housing reserve account. You can do both if you want. We recommend that communities just automatically put the 10% in and then pull it out for projects. That way there's a paper trail that you have, you know, actually fulfilled that requirement. And if anyone ever goes back to a warrant article, they'll see right there at town meeting, you recommended 10% in each of the 3 categories. And then you pulled it out for projects later on. So that's the cleanest way to do it. Open space and recreation share a reserve account. So you can use that for, when we say open space with CPA, we mean conservation land. So you can use that 10% to buy open space, and you can use it for active recreation, which is parks, playgrounds, athletic fields, community gardens, trails, etc. And then, of course, historic. And that's the only requirement. Even the administrative account, it's capped at 5% annually, but it is optional. Most communities do that because you never know what's going to come up during the year, and you might need administrative funds to help with that. But by and large, you know, you can do whatever you want with the rest of the money. You know, and we have communities that, not too many of them, but a couple of them set percentages early in the year. You know, like Cambridge always says, we're going to do 80% for housing. Every single year they talk about it and they decide to do 80% for housing again. Somerville does 45% for housing every year. Most communities don't do it that way. Most of them like to have a little bit more flexibility to change their priorities depending upon what's happening year to year. And they do it on a project by project basis. So one year you might spend all your money except for 20% or 25% in one category, and the next year it might be completely different. I've only seen one community that like really tries to do, you know, 25%, 25%, 25%, and 25%. Which I think is not a good idea, because if you do that, you know, you tend to have great projects that get left out, because if housing is going to get 25% and open space is going to get 25% and rec's going to get 25%, once that quota is gone for that year, there's no more for a great park project that might be left on the sidelines, whereas it might be a down year for historic and you're doing kind of a historic project that's not, you know, the best of projects. It's not really ready for prime time, or it's not a huge priority. So if you set these percentages ahead of time, I do feel that what we've seen across the state is it leads to less desirable projects as people just kind of fill up that requirement. So, you know, there's always been a lot of pressure from the different advocacy groups to raise the 10% to 20% or something like that. But we think having the flexibility is the whole key to CPA success.
Right, and this is the pie that we've adopted in Southwick, because it does give us more flexibility. I mean, there have been advocacy groups that have wanted to have 80% open space at one point, and
Right.
or, you know, even though we might want that, it doesn't leave things left over for housing or historic. But if you put that in the flexible or unreserved, it's still there if you need it.
Yep.
I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's smart. So I was just trying to think, there is one community that does do an outsized amount in open space. I think it might be Bourne that does that. But by and large, most communities don't. All right, so that administrative account, we get a lot of questions on that. And there are some basic things that are okay for an administrative account. Obviously, paying someone like Sabrina to help out the CPC is clearly an okay task, but Sabrina is the only one who works for the town that can be paid out of the administrative account. You can't use that administrative account for any other support time. If the DPW helps on a project or spearheads a project, that comes out of his, annual paycheck. That's his job. If the assessor, takes time to make sure that the CPA surcharge is put on the tax bills properly, that's their job. And you can't reimburse them for that. So the town manager spends time on a legal issue, regarding CPA, that's part of his regular job and salary. And you can't backfill or supplant regular town spending with CPA at any time. The main other use for it is really for due diligence on project recommendations. You might need an appraisal if you're buying a piece of land. You always have to have an appraisal, actually, of consultants. Those sort of things are all fair game for the administrative fund. It is not, however, for project expenses. The administrative fund and the project fund are two completely separate things. There's 95% for projects, 5% for administrative, and you cannot go back to the administrative fund for things you might have forgotten, or if the project bids come in high and you need a little bit more money. We get that question a lot, but unfortunately, the administrative fund is not for anything related to a project after town meeting has already approved the project. That means town meeting has given a budget to that project. And if the project goes over budget, then they have to come back to you folks and start the process again for a supplemental appropriation. And then it has to go back to town meeting. It's not possible to take that from the administrative fund.
Wait, Stuart, I did have a question at one point.
Yes.
About setting up an account for, like, people come in, they have a piece of land that they want to get rid of, and they want to, maybe have the town to take it over. But the process going through CPA funding and getting money for the forward amount for the appraisals and things like that isn't readily available. Is there a way to set up an account for that to be readily available for when projects come up? Or
for appraisals, yes. I mean, you always have your administrative account available for appraisals. So it's really the land cost I think you're asking about, right?
Okay, but that can go through without having a town vote, right? The
Yes.
administrative funds.
Once, if you do your annual budget and you ask town meeting for an appropriation of 5%, whatever that amount is. By the way, when you do these 5 and 10% at town meeting, you can't use percentages. You have to use real numbers, which I'm sure you're doing.
Right. Yep.
So do you remember, Sabrina, what your 5% administrative adds up to?
We had a town meeting.
That's okay. Let's say it's 10,000.
Our admin for, I think, was this year? It must be because it's approved every year.
Available
So
for
it's-
24.
Yeah, over 28,000.
Okay, so let's say it's $30,000 for round numbers. So once town meeting approves that budget, now to spend the budget, it only requires a vote at your meeting. So someone says, the Conscom, has come across a great piece of open space that may be for sale. And they would like to apply for funding, but obviously we're going to need an appraisal. Talk about it at your meeting, and then someone says, I move that we allocate $5,000 from our administrative budget to do an appraisal on the Johnson Road property. So
Sure.
that can be done just at your meeting by a vote of your committee. The only way that you can set aside money for the acquisition costs is if your town has a conservation fund and you transfer CPA money to that conservation fund. Do you know if you have a conservation fund?
We do not.
Not yet.
Okay, so
Not yet.
gotcha. A conservation fund is automatically enabled for any community that has a CONSCOM, a conservation commission. So it's something that your conservation commission would have to create. And then they would apply to you for funding for the conservation fund. And you could transfer money by using the regular CPA process of the CPC ranking and recommendation and then town meeting voted, to transfer $100,000 to the conservation fund. Once you do that, the advantage is that now the Conscom and the select board can buy a piece of property without going to town meeting and waiting for town meeting. So town meeting's approving the money to go into the conservation fund, and hopefully they're being told at that time, look, you're authorizing this money, but you're waiving your right to approve the specific piece of land. Because very often the timing doesn't line up with town meeting when we have to buy a piece of land. So we want to
Right.
have the money available. So that's, otherwise, if every purchase has to be authorized by town meeting. So if there wasn't this conservation fund, there'd be no point, in creating your own fund because you would just have to go to town meeting anyways. So what's the point of having, that's kind of what your open space reserve account is for, right? You can
Right.
always have that. So, the conservation fund is the only way that a community can buy land for conservation without going back to town meeting. There is unfortunately no statutory fund for active recreation purchases for parks, and there's none for historic either. A housing trust is very similar to a conservation fund in that they can buy land without going back to town meeting as well. But those are the only two, a housing trust and a conservation fund.
How much of a percentage can we put in that fund?
As much as you want. That's up to the
Yeah,
CPC.
You just have to bring it to town meeting, whatever we
Right.
recommend, bring
Yep.
there.
We don't typically see, there are a number of communities that have done this. Probably 30 or 40 communities have done this, maybe. I don't see them putting millions of dollars in the conservation fund because, that money may sit there for quite a while. And in the meantime, if you put a lot of money in there, you're going to have to turn away some great projects, in the other categories. So I do see communities that do it, are pretty modest in what they put in there. But at least it gives them a start. And then, very often if there's more money that's required, you partner with a land trust and they run a campaign, and then they apply to the state for a land grant, and, you patch together a number of different funding sources. Your CPA fund is, it's not a huge one, so it's not able to always pay 100% of every project.
Correct.
All right, great question. All right, so let's talk about spending money. CPA, again, does not have anything in the legislation about who can apply for CPA funding. So that's really up to the CPC as to, what they want to allow. But we see general patterns that have emerged. The two biggest consumers of CPA funds are the town itself, and when a department head wants to do something, they apply to you, as you know, just like anyone else. And nonprofit organizations, often if they're doing something that's going to benefit the public, like a land trust buying a piece of open space or helping the town buy a piece of open space, that's a popular area for funding as well. These other areas down the bottom are not prohibited, but they, are things that you want to be extra careful about. So the first caution would come up if you get an application from a non-incorporated entity. So cities, for example, Springfield has like 50 neighborhood associations. Every little corner of Springfield has a neighborhood association, but they're not 501c3s. They're just loosely organized, groups. And there's no legal entity there to give money to. So that's really actually more than a caution. That's really impossible because there's just no legal entity there to accept the money. You just can't give the money to private people to do something. So that's one caution. We do see some communities where people who have really significant historic homes and don't have the means to do, maybe some facade improvements come and ask for funding. It's a difficult thing to do because how do you prove the public benefit of an appropriation like that? That's difficult. And, do you really want to be debating, $50,000 for Mrs. Johnson's house on town meeting floor? Like maybe Mrs. Johnson rubs some people the wrong way, or, others don't like Mrs. Johnson, or her relatives pack the room. So it's an awkward situation, but there is a way to do it. You have to be pretty organized about it, and you have to have an entity that is willing to run a program for homeowners of historic homes. Springfield and Cambridge both do that, but they also have paid professional full-time staffs to run this program. You know, Cambridge has a historic commission with 5 paid staff members. Most communities in the Commonwealth don't have any paid historic professionals on their staff. So it's definitely something you want to, look at very carefully if you do it. And then the other one that happens a lot, but there's a right and a wrong way to do it, is when you have a privately owned historic building, which is a popular use of CPA funds, but more for nonprofits. We do see some historic applications from commercially owned buildings and also religious institutions. Both of those bring different challenges. You're probably aware of the lawsuit on religious grants from Acton from a number of years ago. So they're possible, but there again is a right way and a wrong way to do that to the public benefit. And you just want to look very carefully at those and really consult with your town council if you get those type of applications. All right, so this is the single most important piece of CPA paper. Hopefully it's familiar to all of you. This is the CPA allowable uses chart. And this is really a good case of a picture's worth 1,000 words, because this is a visual of a paragraph in the CPA legislation, which is paragraph 5B2. And it's funny, I said a picture is worth 1,000 words. I don't think there's 1,000 words in that paragraph, but it's a pretty dense paragraph. And it's a paragraph that only a lawyer could love with legalese. And it's the most important paragraph in the CPA legislation because it tells you what you can spend money on. So, I think in the early years of CPA, I got to be honest, I was chair of my committee in my hometown from 2001 to 2006. I'm not sure any of us understood exactly what was okay with CPA funds and what wasn't. But then DOR in like 2005 or so came out with this chart, and it was like a light bulb went off. It was like, oh, this makes it a little bit easier. And notice I said it makes it a little bit easier. It doesn't make it easy. Determining allowable uses and whether something is legal is the hardest thing in CPA. It's what we spend, I'd say 70% of our time on technical assistance with communities is, can we do this project? So it's definitely something that you want to look at this chart first, but it's going to require even more digging to get to an answer on a project and whether it's allowable or not. But the way you use this chart is, the 4 categories of CPA. Everyone knows that, right? We all know open space, historic preservation, and recreation and housing, that CPA is a restricted fund just for those 4 things. But it cannot pay for everything in those 4 categories. Far from it. It can only pay for things in those categories that are described by one of the verbs on the left-hand side. You have to be acquiring something, creating something, preserving something, meaning protecting it from injury, harm, or destruction, doing support activities, or rehabilitating something. So if you can't find a box on this chart to stuff that project into, it is not eligible for funding. And the way you do that is with the budget for the project. And that's why it's so critical that you ask for a budget with your CPA applications. It's not good enough for someone to describe their project. People spend pages and pages in an application describing their project, but then they don't really explain what the actual money is going to be used for. You are interested most in what the CPA dollars are going to buy. What is it actually going to be used for? So the only way you know that is with a budget. Now, everyone should realize that, at the application stage, this project hasn't been bid yet. And so, budgets are going to be guesstimates a little bit. But you still need a budget. You still need to know exactly. So someone can't talk all about fixing up this park and making it beautiful again and making it, useful for the community and, making sure that kids, have access and all these things that describe the project. What you want to know is, are we buying benches? And if we're buying benches, are those permanently affixed to the ground? Are we planting trees? Are we collecting trash? Well, that's not okay because you can't do maintenance or operating expenses. Are we paying for programming? Are we building a big structure like a stage in a backstage, heated storage room? Well, that's a problem. So you've got to know what the money's going to be spent on, not what the description of the project is. And then when you have each individual line item in the budget, you go and you find a box on this chart that you can put that expense in. And it's got to say yes, obviously not no, in that box. And the other thing about this chart is you have to find the verb that best describes that budget item. It's not what we call a verb shopping trip. Like you don't go to the chart and, you find, let me give an example. Someone owns an apartment building that has, 10 affordable housing units in it, and they want to rehabilitate that apartment building. So that's in the rehabilitation box in the housing category, and that says no, right? Unless the building was, originally built with CPA funds. So what folks want to do is they find the verb that really describes the project and they don't like what they see there. So they go shopping for another verb and like, oh, well, let's call it support, or let's call it creation. These verbs do have definitions. It's in section 2 of CPA, all the definitions. And that is, a very important section of the law to read to understand the definitions. But the way you use this chart is you find the box that best describes the project, and then you live with what it says in that box. You don't go verb shopping. So let's give a couple of examples of how folks should think when they're doing a project. So first we'll step through a project that is a yes, and then we'll step through a project that is a no. And we'll show you how someone might do verb shopping on the no project. So first let's start with a project that's okay. Let's say the select board has a historic building in town. You've done this project, many times on your historic buildings, and they're looking to do exterior facade repairs and a new boiler for this historic building. All right, so we're going to analyze that project. So first of all, it's in the historic category, and the definition of a historic resource is it has to be a building, structure, vessel. There should be a comma there. Sorry about that. Vessel meaning a boat, not a vase. Building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact. Has to be one of those 6 things. If it's not one of those 6 things, it's not okay. This historic building is obviously a building, so it's one of those 6 things. So far, so good. But it also has to be a significant historic building. It either has to be on the State Register of Historic Places, or the Historic Commission has to take a vote at their meeting to declare that building significant in the history, archaeology, architecture, or culture of Southwick. So assuming that it is a building and assuming that it's on the register or the Historic Commission is taking that vote, so far, so good on this application. All right, now you go to the chart, right? And you want to find the verb that justifies that project. Well, in the historic category, you're not buying the building, you're not acquiring it, right? Because you already own it. You can't create anything. You're not preserving it, protecting it from injury, harm, or destruction. You are doing rehabilitation activities to that building. And there's a big yes in that box. And a matter of fact, that's where 99% of the historic projects happen, in the rehabilitation box in that category. So again, so far, so good on this project. Now, there's also something else to consider called the Massachusetts Anti-Aid Amendment. And anytime you're asked to spend money on a non-public asset, you have to make sure that there is a clear public benefit to this. In this particular case, you don't have to worry about it because this is a public building, right? But if this had been a private historic society, house museum, you'd have to make sure that, you're putting public money in a private asset there's got to be public benefit. Typically, the best way to get that benefit is to ask for a preservation restriction back. So the town would own a piece of that building. They would actually own the preservation restriction on that building. There are other ways to do it, but the gold standard is to get a preservation restriction. But here in this case, it's a public project, so no worries about step 3. Doesn't apply. And the last thing you want to consider, you've determined that it's eligible, but that doesn't mean it's a priority for you folks, or a priority for the town. And it doesn't mean that you have to recommend it. We still to this very day get questions all the time from CPCs. If we get an application and it's legal, do we have to send it to town meeting? And the answer is absolutely no. If the only requirement was the project was legal to go to town meeting, there wouldn't be any need to have a CPC, right? The law would have said, people will apply to the town council will determine if the project is legal, and then town meeting will vote, right? So the CPC is there to actually really dig into this project, and deliberate on it and do their due diligence, and hopefully even make the project better as part of the due diligence process. So, you're going to want to ask yourself, does this project fit our plan? And that's why it's so important to have a plan. If your plan comes up with the big need in housing is, affordable housing for families with kids, and you get 2 applications in a row from people who want to build senior housing, well, that's not what the need you uncovered is in the town. And so you want to make sure, that's the reason to have that plan, is it gives you guidance on which projects to turn down and which projects to accept. You also have to look at what are the competing applications that cycle, right? You don't have a lot of applications this year, but most years, most CPCs have more applications than they have funding. So just because something is legal, they all might be legal and you can't fund them all. So, that's your job to parse through that thing. The other thing to look at is people come in with applications all the time that are not ready for prime time. There's budgets missing, the application's incomplete. There's what we call glittering generalities. That was a phrase I learned in college in my propaganda course, glittering generalities. The application is filled with wonderful sounding phrases, but it doesn't really tell you anything, because it's not well thought out and no one's really figured it out yet. So, the budget is usually a sign of how well this project has been thought out. If they can produce a budget, they've probably done some work on it. If it's filled with glittering generalities and you put down the application and you say, I still have a million questions. Well, then it's probably not ready for prime time. And you need to, send that application back to them with a gigantic list of questions that you need answered before you can consider it. And then a lot of CPCs, particularly ones that have modest CPA budgets, they can't afford to pay everything 100% of every project. So, they'll give priority to projects that come in with other funding sources already identified. So those are all the things that you want to look at. You absolutely do not have to pass along a project to town meeting just because it's eligible. So, in this particular project, you've had applications to do work on town buildings before, and you've arrived at a yes on some of them, and you've arrived at a no, I know, on others. So that's great. That's the way the process works. So let's go and back to the chart now, and let me give you an example of a project that is not eligible for funding. Let's say you get an application from the Historic Commission or the Historic Society, and they want to do an oral history of World War II veterans. They find out there are only 7 World War II veterans living in Southwick. We want to hire a professional video company, interview each of these folks, get their stories down, videotape all their memorabilia that they have, put together a wonderful half-hour show about the veterans and Southwick's involvement in World War II, and put that at the library, put it on cable TV, and use it in the 3rd grade curriculum at the elementary school. That's the project. It's going to cost $15,000 to hire this production company and make 50 copies of the video. Let's figure out if that project is eligible or not. It's obviously in the historic category. Are you with that project, and the budget shows the money is going toward a video production company to hire them for camera people, audio, tape, editing facilities, and things like that. Is that project acquiring a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact? Are you buying one of those 6 physical things? You absolutely are not. Are you preserving, protecting from injury, harm, or destruction, a building, structure, vessel, real property, document, or artifact? Nope. And you're not rehabilitating one of those 6 things either. This project is not eligible for CPA funding. In fact, the 2 verbs that best describe this project are create and support. You're creating something brand new, a video. That's a new thing. You're not fixing up something old, you're creating something new. And the legislature got this one right. You can't create anything new in the historic category. So that verb is out. And support, it does support the historic, aims of the town, and in the historic category, it's clearly related to history and supports that, but you can't do support activities in most categories. The only one where it's allowed is in the housing category. So, people will definitely, if they were applying for this project, they would definitely gloss over the create and support, and call this a preservation project. They'd shop for a verb and say, yes, we're preserving, an important piece of our history, is what they would say, as they shopped for a verb that justified the project. We love to see applications from CPCs that actually put this chart in the application and ask the applicant to circle the box or boxes that justify the budget in their project. Really make the applicant think about it rather than just sort of tossing something to you and having you guys figure it out. Make them think up front about whether what they're considering might need some tweaking to get it to be legal. So that's a great thing to do in your applications. Any questions on the allowable uses or the allowable uses chart?
Can you give an example of support for housing?
Yes. Great question. So first of all, why is support only available in the housing category, right? That's a question I get all the time. And I don't really know the answer to that definitively, but what we think is the legislature knew that housing was going to be the toughest category. It's the toughest category for any community. Housing is expensive. It's politically charged. It takes years. It takes red tape up the yin yang before you're even able to put a shovel in the ground, right? And so you'll notice the most yeses on this chart are in the housing category. They wanted to give as many tools in the toolbox for housing. And in fact, they didn't even put a definition of the word support in the original legislation. Every other word on this chart, except for create, which is pretty obvious, has a definition, but support did not. So in 2012, when the legislature made some updates to CPA, they put in a definition of support. And the definition says that support is, shall include, but not be limited to, activities that help folks creating affordable housing and who live in affordable housing, to help them meet their monthly housing obligation. So things like rental assistance programs or down payment assistance programs. Obviously, any kind of activities, there's so many things you have to do with red tape before you even put a shovel on the ground, as I said. So a perk test to see if a piece of land might be good for housing. Hiring a housing coordinator or a housing consultant for the town. Writing a housing production plan to give you some guidance on how to do housing would be support. Those are really some of the basic things that support activities would do. CPA is not a social services program, so support doesn't include, things like, making repairs to senior citizens' homes, so they can stay in their homes. It doesn't include heating oil assistance or foreclosure counseling, any of these kind of social services programs. The housing category is about creating housing opportunities for folks, new housing units or new housing programs like rental assistance. That's the goal of CPA with housing.
We had a question from Brian.
Yes.
Would like a property manager be considered support for a housing?
No, but not because of the definition of support. It would be a no because elsewhere in CPA, it clearly says that you can't use CPA funds for any ongoing maintenance or operating costs. So you can build the housing, but you can't tune up the boiler. You can't buy the oil. You can't salt and shovel the steps. You can't pay for staff to fix things in the building, little minor repairs and that sort of thing. So you can't run programs for the senior citizens that live in the affordable housing. It's for capital expenses. It cannot be for any ongoing maintenance or operating costs. And that, by the way, Brian, applies in all the CPA categories, not just housing. There is a broad unilateral prohibition on maintenance and operating expenses with CPA. And that was smart by the legislature because the one thing that communities are terrible at is maintaining their assets. Town municipal buildings, usually there's not enough money to maintain those properly. And they knew if they let CPA be used for maintenance, there'd be nothing new happening. We wouldn't have any new historic rehabilitation. We wouldn't have any new open space purchased. Communities would just use it all for deferred maintenance and operating costs. That answer the question, Brian?
Definitely.
Great. Okay. All right. So speaking of housing, the CPA legislation has gotten a little bit of criticism in the past year for potentially not doing enough for housing statewide. There are individual communities that are doing a terrific job for housing, but it's very uneven. And we do have a lot of other communities in the CPA universe who are not really underperforming on housing. And there's a lot of reasons for that, right? As we talked about, housing is very complicated. It's not for the faint of heart, and it's usually not something volunteers can figure out on their own. It's expensive, and it's got all sorts of politics attached to it. So it's hard. A lot of communities have shied away from that. Some of them deliberately, some of them just because they don't have the resources in the town. And others have tried and just failed at town meeting, like in my community. So there is a little bit of a spotlight on CPA right now for housing. You folks can't open a newspaper, if there are any newspapers to open anymore, or turn on the news or turn on the radio without hearing about the housing crisis in Massachusetts. It is the topic of conversation. It is completely dominates what's happening on Beacon Hill. That hearing tomorrow that we're attending all day is on housing. It's a housing bond bill. We do have a little bit, I think, of a target on our back with CPA. And so it's definitely something that we think, communities should really redouble their efforts to look at whether they're really doing enough in the housing category. And can they be more intentional and commit more resources and really make sure that housing is well represented in the annual group of projects. I fear that if we don't step up the pace a little bit with CPA in a lot of the communities that are lagging, that the legislature will dictate some changes that we may not like. And I can see that happening sooner rather than later. So it's just a, you know, a little bit of a cautionary tale. You know, I haven't looked at Southwick's projects and we're not here to judge. I don't know whether you folks have done a great job or not so great job with housing. But you know, and it's certainly something you want to look at. And if you definitely have underperformed, it's something you want to really spend some time thinking about and working hard on. You know, because it is the biggest problem in the Commonwealth. Not quite as large a problem out west as it is out east, but it's still a problem. And it's really threatening our economic vitality in Massachusetts too. So, all right, I can step off my soapbox now, right? So a couple other
Thank you
things.
for the nudge.
Yeah, no problem. Happy to do it. And we're happy to help. And there's a great course at the I wish there were 50 of these. Shelley Gehring is the person I'm talking about. I wish we could clone Shelley and spread her all over the state, but she's a housing resource at the Massachusetts Housing Partnership, and she helps communities with housing issues, particularly CPA communities. She's terrific and can really be of assistance. And you guys have a pretty active housing trust, don't you?
I
No?
wouldn't say that active, no.
No? Okay.
We don't really have hardly any projects coming
Yeah. All right.
forward at all, so.
Yeah. So that, I mean, you guys can't do it alone, right? You do have to
Right.
have the support of everyone else in town, and the housing, if the housing trust is not robust, that may be one of the first things you can assist with in revitalizing that group.
I do know there's at least one select board member looking into the uses for the housing fund, so. I think we're moving towards the right direction anyway here.
Good. But it's you know, most CPA applications are a little bit more reactive. They come to the CPC. With the housing category, I think we're going to need to be more proactive, rather than reactive in the coming year or two. So that's the housing category. A couple quick comments on the open space and particularly the recreation category. CPA, like I said, is not for ongoing maintenance or operating expenses or programming on recreational land. But it is for capital projects mostly, making big changes that are affixed to the ground, like the big playground we see in the picture here. As we talked about, no maintenance or operating expenses. You can't put money into stadiums with CPA funds. Typically, the only facility in a town that might rise to the level of a stadium is where the varsity high school football team plays. You know, if it's got a lot of built environment there, that would be considered a stadium. CPA is only for outdoor recreational facilities. It can never pay for any indoor facilities and, you know, with walls. We did have a lawsuit on sidewalks where the town of Norwell wanted to use CPA funds on sidewalks alongside streets. And they were sued by their citizens. And I just noticed a second typo here. This is not good. We have 2 typos in our presentation tonight, and I'm sorry, and I'm going to correct those before I send it to you tomorrow. You know, Norwell lost that lawsuit. And so we now know that sidewalks along roads are transportation assets. They're not dedicated recreational land. Now, if the sidewalk is inside a park, that's fine. You know, that's dedicated recreational land. But if it's along a road, it is a transportation asset. It's within the road right of way. And then we also had a couple of lawsuits on artificial turf too. And the CPA legislation now has a prohibition on using CPA funds to put down an artificial turf surface. So any questions on that category?
Nope.
All right. So that's it. We've kind of done a high level view of the different categories and the different kind of rules that apply to that. Spent some time with the allowable uses chart and talked about the trust fund for the coming year. And hopefully we will be letting you know soon about a new employee that we're going to be advertising very soon for someone to help us with advocacy work on Beacon Hill. They'll probably immediately jump right into those housing issues that we've been talking about. And that person will also be doing a lot of research for us too. So we've really increased there's a section of our website called the Data Bank, which has lots of statewide statistics and reports, and we've really beefed that up over the past few months. So, and there's so much more to be told, you know, with 16,000 projects that we can really dig in and help communities. So we're really looking forward to this new person coming on board to do that. And that's what I have for you tonight. Happy to take
You
any
had
other.
mentioned, a lady's name that was housing and you ring by who she works
Yes,
for.
okay. Her name is Shelley Gehring, Goehring, Goehring, and she works for MHP, the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. And I believe her email is just her name with a dot in between at mhp.net. And I'm going to look that up right now for you. She is fabulous. We've been working with her for at least a decade. She really has a ton of experience on two things, CPA housing and housing trusts. She's also very helpful for housing trusts. Oh no, her email is S Gehring. So SGOEHRING at mhp.net. S Gehring at mhp.net.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions? Any projects you wanted to talk about? Sabrina, you had emailed me about a clerk of the works issue too that we talked about on email. I don't know if there's anything more to discuss with that, but any particular ideas you wanted to run by or dig into?
Well, we can talk about the clerk of the works thing, 'cause if anything, it'll be something that, you know, we'll learn from.
Yeah.
And actually in your packets, you have, the members have the account report it is for the CPA repair slate roof and cupola. On there, they had said under vendor salaries, clerk of the works. And so when I saw that, it kind of like raised a red flag, because I know that we're not supposed to be supplementing, supplanting salaries. So I did a little digging, and Carl got back to me saying that this wasn't paying for the clerk of the works, municipal salary was on top of, it. So he was the clerk of the works for this project. And so the project money was paying for it, him.
So we okayed X amount of dollars and that X amount of dollars was included in their estimate.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure they wrote it down on the budget. I can't really remember the application. I
Yeah,
think,
but I think the question is more who was paid to is also a town employee.
yeah.
Is
He's also,
receiving.
sorry, I
money.
forgot to mention that.
Oh.
He's
That's,
also,
that's the bigger
and
question.
he's also the clerk of the works for the town.
He's the
So
clerk of
that's
the works
why
for the
it
town and
confused me.
receiving clerk of the works funding from this project. Even though he is the town clerk of works. So that was,
So is he a full-time 40-hour-a-week town employee?
I believe so.
And so if you looked in the town budget, there'd be a salary.
Mhm.
All municipal salaries are public. There'd be a salary for that position, right?
Yep.
So what would be supplanting is if his time spent on this CPA project was part of his regular salary and part of his 40-hour week, that would be supplanting.
Mhm.
correct.
If he was paid a stipend on top of what's in the town's budget, on top of his full-time salary, and so he worked 45 hours a week and spent 5 hours on clerk of the works for this CPA project, that would probably not be supplanting, although it is not an ideal situation because, you know, there's supplanting and then there's appearance of supplanting. And,
Right.
And normally, if someone is a full-time employee, they usually don't get paid extra to do particular things. Normally it's within their 40-hour week job. If they work 40 hours doing the clerk of the work on all the town projects, they should be doing the clerk of the work for all the town projects, whether they're paid for by CPA or not. CPA is just a funding source, right? Every town project has different funding sources, right? Some town projects get state money, state grants. Some get federal grants. Some, have private fundraising. Some have general municipal funds. Some have mitigation money. Every project is paid for by a variety of different sources. CPA is just one of those sources, but that person is paid to do the clerk of the works for all those projects. So why he would be paid or she would be paid extra on top of their 40-hour a week salary that's in the city, town budget, I don't know. But that does sound strange.
Mm,
Yep, so we did get a response back from the town. They did get an opinion from an attorney from Mass DOR about the concern, and they did say that it was legal, so I suppose they are giving him a stipend on top of his salary, but we don't have the documentation supporting that, so.
And that would be easy to get,
Right.
just ask for the payroll records. Payroll records unfortunately, for public employees are very public.
Right.
And that is unfortunate because I do think pay should be a little bit of a private thing, but I guess there's nothing private when you're public. So, one of the most popular websites in the entire state is the Boston Herald's state employee database, where you can type in any state employee and their salary pops up from the governor on down to, a snowplow operator. And same thing with the town. So, that should be easy documentation to get. What this person's salary is and what their monthly payroll checks were. They could easily run a report on that. And if you see a separate line item that says, additional CPA, project work, in a separate amount, and that was over and above their salary that was in the town budget, then it would, probably be okay.
Right.
But it also calls into question is this person a exempt employee or non-exempt? Right? Exempt employees, I get them backwards. One is hourly and one is paid a salary. And when you're paid a salary, you don't get overtime. If it takes you 45 hours to do your job, it takes you 45 hours. If it takes you 35 hours, it takes you 35 hours. So if he's an hourly employee, someone help me, is that exempt or non-exempt? I get those two confused all the time.
Non-exempt.
Non-exempt. If they're
That's a-
non-exempt, then they would have to be, and they worked more than 40 hours, they'd have to be paid overtime. State law requires exempt employees to be, or non-exempt, I forget what you said, to be
Right,
paid.
so I-
overtime. So why, that means you would have been paying overtime for your project.
All right, so hopefully he's salaried employee, then and that's just a stipend on top of his salary.
Yeah. Usually if you're salaried, you don't get, like I said, if it's whatever it takes to
No
get the
overtime, right?
Yeah. But that might be, but that might be different with municipal employees and union contracts. I don't know, actually. That might be different with municipal employees. It might not be the same as the private sector, whereas if you're a salaried employee, you're expected to stay until your job's done. But that may be different out of town. So
I know as a teacher, I got my salary, didn't matter how long I, did homework for when I got home. But if I took on another responsibility like coaching or whatever, you get a stipend for that. So it's,
okay, yeah. So that, that could very well be the case, but it would be easy for the town to document. It is the number one thing, that is frowned upon with CPA. That's a big one. Supplanting is one of the major ones with CPA.
Right.
So, when they got this opinion, did they get it in writing by chance?
we have some legalese here. It says,
it was through an email and he
Guidelines,
said,
section F on pages 7 and 8 that sets forth exclusion for administrative funds, but permits construction expenses from the project's appropriations.
Well, yeah, that's obvious. I mean, you can
Yeah.
always pay for a clerk of the works with CPA. It's just
Right,
99% of the time, it's an outside contractor who is the clerk of the works.
right.
Most,
So we're not sure if the information was conveyed correctly to the attorney.
yeah,
If the attorney gave that response in regard to the question asked, or
Yeah.
if it was really,
yeah,
Uh,
that doesn't answer,
discuss
that doesn't
properly.
answer the question of them being a full-time employee and supplanting. That just says you can pay for a clerk of the works, which of course you absolutely can pay for a clerk of the works.
right,
As long as it doesn't run afoul of the supplanting rules of CPA.
right.
So, um,
So that might need to get looked into a little bit more carefully then.
right. And it would be the, just, a cautionary tale for the CPC when they're doing due diligence on future projects, you'll want to look closely at the budget and ask the question, is anyone who's a full-time town employee, going to be, supplanted out of this CPA appropriation?
Right. All right. Well, we appreciate you coming and answering our questions. We had some pretty good information tonight, I feel. I got some pretty good notes written down, some places to go with that. So, I mean, I'm certainly happy you were able to join us tonight.
Great. I always love
Yeah.
helping folks in Southwick. You are an amazing CPA community. I visited the tobacco factory probably a decade ago, and I still use that picture and talk about that project everywhere I go. I have a picture of the tobacco factory. I have a picture of the field where it used to be, and I have a picture of the CVS store that was built.
There you go. Yeah.
And I show both of them my presentation, and everyone always gasped. And I was like, this is now this. And I show the CVS, and you were like,
Right.
what happened to it? And I'm like,
Yeah.
well, the story has a good ending. That is just one of the coolest places when you walk in there and it's like someone turned out the lights in 1905 and walked out the door, locked it, and no one walked in that building again for 100 years. It's just,
Yeah.
it was incredible. The invoices in the desk drawer and the baskets of tobacco sitting there, still filled, 100-year-old tobacco just sitting, waiting to be processed. It's just an incredible project. I hope, have you all been inside of it?
I actually
I have,
haven't.
yeah, we are also doing a project on the Morehouse that's right adjacent to the
Yes.
factory.
Yep.
And we just went down, a lot of us went and took a tour of that just this past fall.
Yeah, we didn't
see
go in there
the
that
water.
day. So I have not been in there. Although we
Yeah.
did just put the picture of the sign unveiling on our website that Sabrina sent us. But
Right.
Sabrina, you said you have not been in the tobacco factory?
I haven't. No, you're making me
Oh,
feel
Sabrina,
guilty.
you have to go. It's incredible. It's really incredible. Just one of my favorite projects. So you're all doing a terrific job, and let us know how we can help you in the future.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank
And
you.
Thank
I'm so
you.
happy you're always available every time we call. Give us your full benefit of your time, and we appreciate that. So,
No problem. All right. Good luck.
Thank
all right.
you.
Thank you.
take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And good luck tomorrow.
I know, right?
Okay, so
Okay.
let's look at our minutes from September 20th so we can get those on the books.
Even though half of it already got, step down meeting.
Huh?
Some of the stuff that was on September already got approved to.
Well, that's
Like a
okay.
special,
It's just minutes that go in our
I know.
officially.
There's a lot. It's been a minute since I looked at it.
We have Thursday instead of Thursday.
Thank you.
Not that that makes a big difference, but
I don't know how to spell check, didn't pick that up.
Spelling.
spell check should have picked it up. I don't know why. I didn't.
Yeah. Maybe I accidentally saved it as a new word. I used to do that a
Oh,
lot.
I have kids at school that do that all the time. It's like, no, you can't do
Yeah. I don't know how to reverse it, so like the same word. that-
In the last line of the first page.
unavailable.
Yep.
Wow. Maybe spell check was not on.
And then.
Grammarly is my favorite. You can download an extension, Grammarly.
I have it on my-
Second page initially.
You said second line initially. Yeah, I have it on my private computer.
Mm-hmm. Here should be like a comma.
Permanent. First paragraph.
Um,
What was that?
Permanent in the first paragraph,
Um,
next sentence. On the second page. So I'll pick it up.
permanent.
it's revealing how badly I spell.
Spelling is not my forte, I know that. Right, Michelle?
She probably just said yes. She's on mute then.
I said yes. Fourth paragraph up on page 2. Right hand side maintenance.
Couple things.
Yeah. Couple times.
Wait, what?
Maintenance, but it's maintains.
It's a good
I'm
name.
missing a
It's in there.
syllable.
Yeah, It's in there.
Part names.
couple times, so.
Damn.
Double check here. Oh, yeah.
Spelled it right one time.
Audience, 2 paragraphs up from the bottom. Left hand side, almost where your thumb is.
Got it.
Yeah, we should do better at getting names.
Hmm?
We should do better at getting the names of the people who ask the questions.
Mm.
You know, like Gene does. What's your name? Give me your name.
A little scary at times.
Hey,
But
she gets her
it
name.
done. The job.
write your name down.
Job done.
He does.
Blech.
Five paragraph up on page 4. Discussion among the committee, projects through.
Okay.
Yeah, look at there you are. Community preservation plan needs to be created.
End up being.
And like Stuart said, when we first did this, you didn't have to do that, so I'm thinking, I don't know. But we never had one,
Yeah,
so I'm like, I don't even know that we needed to. That's why I say we peer poach some things and then apply. And well, let's discuss our needs, then
mhm.
read through and apply it.
We've already done the base part of it, the open space and recreation that just needs to be reviewed, and I started the housing section.
Mhm. Very good. All right, well, I don't see much anything else. I'll take a motion.
The motion to approve the minutes for September 20th, 2023 with the corrections there. Yeah.
Okay. Take a second.
There's been a second.
Okay, all in favor, aye, Beth Thomas, we'll do a roll.
That Thomas, I.
Chris Pratt, aye.
Jeannie Rita.
Brian Walter, aye. Dave Spina, aye.
Okay. Minutes are accepted with corrections. Very good. Anybody have anything else they want to address tonight? Open comment, public comment.
You
Okay.
done that?
We have the signature sheets. Pass that around.
So we have a few things on new business.
Mm-hmm,
One was discuss the use of CPC funds, which we covered with Stuart.
mm-hmm.
I don't know if anyone else wants to elaborate on what was said or.
No. I don't think so.
Okay. So then we can go on to vote to return funds to the appropriate CPA fund.
Mm-hmm,
We have $722 left over from the Right to Farm signage project. This would be to return back to the open space and recreation fund.
I make a motion to refund that money back to the open space and recreation fund.
Dave's been a second.
All in favor?
I.
Aye, unanimous.
I have to write this down, Chris. Motion. Spina, second, so that's $722. Next would be the old fire station assessment. It's been complete and there is $3,000 left, and that would be returned to the historical fund.
I'll make a motion to return $3,000 to the historical fund.
Dave's been a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Yes. Next,
Next is the restoration of bronze memorial. So this is finished. It's done. Dave Sutton said, go have a look. It looks great.
okay,
There is the $3,500 left over and it needs to be returned to the historical
I'll
fund.
make a motion to return that to the historical fund.
Dave's been a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Awesome.
Ditto.
Okay.
And now we have to review the 2023 annual CPC town report. This needs to be submitted, I think, the first week of February. You have it in your folder. Have a look and see if you approve and if there's any spelling mistakes.
Well, the only thing is we gotta come and fill in the blah blahs.
Did I say blah blah?
Mm, Potential future problem.
Oh,
blah,
yeah, we
committee
do
plans,
actually have to do
blah.
that. I totally forgot about that. We gotta blah blah.
Why don't we just make a line through that?
Like that.
You can put a line through those.
Do we want to talk about anything that the committee wants to do in the next year? We
I
had-
think, need to put out, like, and we talk about this, I believe, almost every year, is getting word out to the community to come in with plans. Especially ideas for housing now that we know that we need some housing projects to be proactive on those. I mean, I know that, Dave Sutton at one point had said something about, housing for, veterans or something
Mhm.
like that, but we, have to think of a project for that,
We went to, you took our pictures at the firehouse
Mhm.
and Joanne was talking about a property over by the lake that they were looking at for housing.
Hmm,
And I said, wonderful, please bring that
Yeah.
information to the meeting so that. we can
she's aware that we're looking, she's,
Thinking about
Right.
it, right? And,
yeah,
But she mentions the word out to the public.
right, so.
So this would be that.
I don't know, we've done channel 15, which isn't great. I mean, not many people tune into channel 15. There's the town crier over at Gristmill that we
I
put things
noticed
on
it the other
before,
day. It was up there
Um,
2 weeks ago. or
yeah.
so.
but it's, you know,
Publicizing our, although, well, publicizing our annual, presentation more, a little bit more, so that maybe people.
right, we did
show
a
up.
poor
Well,
job at that last year. That was like,
But we did it on a whim, but
yeah,
maybe if we do that to get more people to at least come and see what it's about.
right. That definitely
That
needs to be
might
more
be-
publicized.
Yeah, and maybe
Our
we can
annual town
create,
meeting. Not our annual town meeting, but our
our
annual meeting,
one where we,
informational.
informational, yeah.
It looked like, what's the name of that magazine that comes around?
Southwoods.
Oh, Southwoods,
Yeah, we've talked about that too,
yeah.
putting things in there.
I look at that.
Yeah,
Or what about a pamphlet that we create?
well, no, that'd be a bad thing too.
Where?
I don't know, we could do maybe we could do a mass mailing. Like
Or just leave them out at South, at,
Leave them at places. yeah.
restaurants or,
Leave some pamphlets at when people come in to vote.
Yeah.
Yes. Or at
Yeah.
the front, when you go pay your excise tax or
Yeah.
things like that.
right,
Have you been in there? Do
Property.
you have any idea how many pamphlets? And I don't mean to be a brat, but
Yeah,
There
I see
are-
'em.
like,
But usually when I'm standing in line waiting to be waited on, I'll just kind of glance at stuff. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily.
and maybe we could make
It's
a
up, but-
poster, say, take one. Then arrows, I don't know,
Or one of those like
Yeah.
your CPC funds at work things and
yeah,
here.
right,
this.
instead of just this report, maybe we make a poster every year of how the money's spent and put it down in the lobby. And give information on how to come forward with projects.
I mean, it's a little, you're defeating the purpose by doing it at a town meeting when we have, so in essence, you're actually doing it, and it doesn't hurt to do it at a town meeting, but then we're defeating the purpose because we already have stuff on the agenda, so we're
Right.
kind of like advertising for the following.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't hurt to do that, but we don't want to make it look, I mean. you
Well, I
have
mean,
to
I
get
think
stuff on the
any
agenda.
place or any time that we have an opportunity isn't a bad place or time,
Mhm,
it's,
mhm.
I think we do need to be more proactive at,
when does housing meet?
mm,
And we at one point were talking about going around to all the boards and talking to everybody. Did we do
that'd
that?
be a bad idea,
Because that's generally where our applications come from.
right?
Joe Homeowner.
Well, usually
isn't
they,
gonna come and give
no,
us
but
an
usually you're right, they
application.
do come through the committees. That's where they should be coming, from anyway, but
Let's see when they-
especially like the historical, I'd definitely like to get through to them. I mean, we do get historical projects coming through, but we don't have a representative that comes to our meetings to tell us about the project
Yeah,
or,
liaison,
yeah.
yeah.
It's-
So we usually get Lee, who's not even on the committee, he's on the society.
Mhm.
which isn't a bad
And
thing.
he's forgotten more than everyone else.
Oh my God,
in the
he's
building
amazing.
knows.
Yeah, he's amazing.
He's amazing.
So it's a housing authority.
So
They-
I guess our mission is to find out when the boards meet. Go bug them.
The
Well,
housing
couldn't
is,
that be stuff that we just discussed in your little blah blah, you can put it in there?
Blah, blah.
The committee plans to
that's good.
make more,
Promote.
Do interboard outreach.
I like that. Enter out.
Which
Interboard
basically
outreach.
just means we're coming to get you.
Mhm.
So the housing authority, they say the third Tuesday of each month at 7 PM. In the activity room at 12 Depot Street.
Third Tuesday of every month.
Yeah.
In the community.
Activity room at 12 Depot, so that's the housing authority.
Did they
Depot
did they
Court.
start the floor yet?
They finished the floor.
They finished the floor.
Yeah. Yep.
What if my car breaks down and I need to ride home? Just don't take the ride home.
Uh-oh.
There's a comma.
Don't take home. Brian.
Mhm.
Take on Brian. Come
Um,
here.
so. Well, I guess I have two questions because, so I'm gonna update this paragraph. And I don't think we're gonna have another meeting before this needs to be submitted. Do you want me just to send it out to everybody?
No, I say we vote on it now
With-
without the blah, blah, blahs, but putting in
Okay,
more community outreach. Interboard outreach. You know,
Yeah.
I'd say just, and then the rest is fine,
okay, okay.
you know. You know, just go with that. Can I take a vote on that?
Mhm.
I'll make a motion to do that. Do I have a second?
I'll second motion to do that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Wait, okay, wait.
We had
who
3 seconds and 1 eye.
Seconded.
After I'm not sure which one. Got it, real wire.
You started first.
So it's,
Yeah, I'm sorry,
It
I
was
tried,
Spina
I
again?
tried to upset the rhythm. It was 1, 2, and then yes.
so Spina?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes, I upset the rhythm.
it's fine. I just need to know who did it. That's all we have basically with new. We have old business
You just
reviews,
did it, we
CPC
haven't-
application forms, but we
Yeah.
don't really need to do that. Community preservation plan updates.
I like what Stuart said about the application form, though, is having that,
The box.
the box on there. I think that might be a good addition to put on there.
With the definitions.
Well,
Yeah.
Also true.
Oh, and a disclaimer, no verb shopping.
yeah, yeah, which
I like
does,
that.
which does happen.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, category and verb shopping a lot.
do we want to say when our next meeting is going to be or just?
No, TBD.
Okay. All right,
When they bug us for more minutes, then we'll come back,
yeah,
unless somebody has a project, of course.
They don't get minutes until we get a updated budget
There you go.
of that.
I like that. But like
I
like-
will if you will, and I won't if you don't.
you don't get paid, you do.
And some quite a lot.
Mm. But the, like Stuart said, we should be getting an update. Like when all department has to get their budget updates, we should get one as well.
Yeah, I feel like that might be the case. Cause I do get one every
Okay.
once in a while. The last one I got though was, I think, the 20th of November.
It Said November 29th on that.
Yeah,
piece of paper.
yeah, so it's been a couple months, but
Okay.
So is it Sabrina that has to deal with this? How was the
Mhm.
question posed?
Well, she's a scanner. She's goes through them first. Yeah.
Because if it was, can you have a?
Oh,
clerk
she's the
of
one that
works?
discovered the whole thing
I
too.
know.
Yeah, so I think she could delve into the salary versus the stipend kind of thing.
what's
Cause that was, you know, a good question. And she found it and said, hey,
That's awesome.
yeah,
But it's terrible because if he is a salaried employee, then
right,
this isn't okay.
right.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And if the question was posed to the attorney, can we have a clerk of the works? Of course you can have a clerk of the works.
Right, and that's usually what happens.
Since you're part of
Then
the
it gives us their answer like, well, he's not gonna tell me what the answer, what question you asked, but you're gonna give me what the answer was.
But,
It's like when you're getting a, no. I'll take a motion to close the hearing, close the meeting.
Dave Spina, so moved.
Any seconds?
Beth Thomas second.
Guys.
All in favor?
Aye.
Wait,
Shut
so,
it down.
wait, hold on, Spina did it this
I
time?
did the
Yeah.
motion.
Who did the second?
I
Beth,
All
That was
right,
unanimous.
time is 8:53 PM. All right, we are ending the meeting for all.
Thanks.
Thank
Close it
you.
down.
This,